We've been talking about pollution, where it comes from, how we can reduce it, and the effects of pollution on our ecosystems. Now we're going to take a closer look at how the environment and the pollution in it affects our human health. So we're going to look deeper at people and the effects on people. So effects of pollution could be a very direct effect, almost like you've been poisoned by the thing. So lead poisoning, lung cancer, the thing that's in the air or water is what is being ingested or inhaled and is causing the problem. Or it could be a little bit more indirect, such as think of a polluted waterway. Polluted waterways, not very well maintained, could allow insects to breed, could allow the spread of pathogens and bacteria. And so those pathogens could lead to diseases like cholera or river blindness. And it all has to do with polluted waterways, not that you're directly ingesting, the water, but it's the that water being bad quality indirectly allows other things to spread and cause some problems. Now, economics does play a role, especially when you're looking at water quality. If you're in a developed country, then usually you have firmer regulations and you have the economics to take care of your waterways, your sewage plants, your industrial sites. You can afford the scrubbers and the electrostatic precipitators and the water treatment plants and whatnot. Whereas in a developing country, you tend to have poor health because they don't have the means to keep their environment as clean, and they don't have the regulations a lot of times to force companies to do that. So you might have polluted water. They might allow insect-borne diseases and bacteria to spread through their communities. So some types of pollutants and the effects of them: pesticides, those chemicals can cause, for humans, nerve damage, birth defects. Of course, pesticides are made to kill things. So in a large enough quantity, they can, of course, lead to big problems with people too. Lead paint, gasoline, those have both pretty much been phased out in developed countries, but maybe not so much in developing nations. So brain damage, learning problems, those relate to having that heavy metal, that lead in your bloodstream. Particulate matter, think from things burning, whether that's the exhaust from your car or waste that's being burned, fires, tobacco smoke. All those particulates get into your lungs and can cause respiratory damage. Coal dust from mining. Our mining industry, not even getting to the point where they burn the coal and emit that, but just the mining itself, it stirs up a lot of dust. And miners tend to have what's called black lung disease from inhaling all those particulates. And then bacteria in the food. If you've got poor sanitation, you're not handling food very well, you may not have the resources to cook it very well, then that can lead to gastrointestinal infections, which can lead to dehydration or malnutrition. So we can look at substances like the pesticides, like chemicals, in a branch called toxicology. That's the study of substances that are toxic and how toxic they are. We look at the nature of this substance, the effects of it. Does it cause respiratory damage, or does it cause bleeding, or whatever the toxicology is doing? How to detect it, how to know if it's there or not, how to treat for it, and how to control exposure to that chemical. Now, it's important to remember, like we looked at with our LD50 lab, that almost any chemical can be harmful if a large amount, if enough of it is taken in. Even water has a toxicology level. Now, it's really high. You'd have to just almost vomit from too much water in order for it to be a problem. But every substance does have a level of toxicity. The higher that level, then the higher the quantity before it gets toxic, then the more safe it is. But as they say, the little saying is, the poison is in the dosage. Anything can be poison if you've had enough of it. Think for instance, Tylenol. Tylenol, if you take one, it helps your headache. If you take 100, then it could kill you. So it all has to do with the dosage. So we need to know how much of it is out there how it gets into our bodies, how much of it is getting into our bodies. And so that exposure, how much of the chemical we've been exposed to, is called the dose. Now, you've heard the word dose with medicines before. You might have a dose of Tylenol that's okay to take. And then what happens to our bodies as a result is called the response. So the response to the dose depends. Again, like Tylenol, you take one, it helps. If you take a whole bunch, really bad. So it depends on how many times you're exposed, the person's size. That's why they have different dosing and different medicines for children than they have for adults. How well your body breaks down the chemical and metabolizes. So we can get different responses depending on the dose. So persistent chemicals, they break down very slowly in our environment. It's very dangerous because we're exposed to it a lot. We're more likely to come in contact because it's there, and it's more likely to remain in our body for a long period of time. So when we look at these dose response curves, if we were to plot the response versus how much of a dose we've had, below what's called the threshold, you get very little effect. You have to have enough of it to cause a response, and then exposure above that gives you more effects or more severe effects. So they've got 3 lines here. This is what we're talking about, these threshold toxicants. This is a chemical in which for a while you don't notice anything's wrong at all. And then suddenly your body starts having adverse effects to it. So think like carbon monoxide. If you've got anything in your house that runs off natural gas, you probably are occasionally exposed to a little bit of carbon monoxide, but a little bit's not bad. It's when the carbon monoxide builds up in your home that suddenly you start getting the nausea and the headache and whatnot. And that is when you start getting to that threshold that causes problems. Some things are so toxic that it doesn't matter how much you have, it's going to cause a problem. And the more you have, the bigger the problem is. That's a no threshold toxicant. And then you have things like essential nutrients. Vitamins and minerals, if you don't have enough, can be bad. And the less that you have, the worse it is. Think like vitamin C, for instance. If you don't have enough vitamin C, then it's a bad thing. There's a certain amount that's good for you to have, and then too much of it can actually start to cause problems. So essential nutrients, if you notice, looks more like a U because too little is not good, but also too much is not good. There's a sweet spot in there. So we can look at the risk. We can assess risk to a person from a certain substance. And again, remember from way back, risk is the probability of something negative happening. So disease, injury, death, whatnot. If we look at the risk, then that can lead to regulations on how and where a substance can be used. So we can, maybe Tylenol is fine, but they put the childproof caps on there to minimize the risk of being exposed. Some things come in very well sealed packages. Some things come in smaller containers. You can only buy so much. Some you have to be over 18 to buy it. So they're going to try to do some regulations to prevent people from being exposed to too much at a time. Now, back to kind of natural sources. Radon we talked about with pollution. That's an odorless radioactive gas from granite bedrock. So we don't have to worry about that too much around East Texas because we don't have that granite bedrock. But we do have to worry about particulates. So dust, soot, ash. They can cause irritation in the lungs. They can definitely have natural sources to them. And then heavy metals can occur naturally in rocks and soils, things like arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury. And those heavy metals can cause nerve damage when you've had too much, when you get beyond that threshold dose. Human activities, though, is what we typically think of when we think about regulating chemicals and minimizing our risk to it. One of the problems that we have when determining toxicity and risk and exposure is there's chemicals coming out all the time. Chemical companies are constantly inventing new chemicals, new molecular formulas. About 1,000 new chemicals are put on the market each year, whether it's a cleaning solvent or a medicine or a, paint additive to make the paint last longer. There's all kinds of things that are always introduced, and only about 10% of those are able to be tested for toxicity. So there's a lot of chemicals out there that may not have been fully tested yet. Regulations help reduce our exposure, but which does help. I mean, we're much healthier and we don't have as much exposure to toxic chemicals as we did in the past, but sometimes it takes the market a little while to catch up. Now, a little bit of a reminder, pesticides are chemicals that we use to kill unwanted insects, funguses, plants. So that'd be insecticide, fungicide, herbicide. Those have helped food production, so they are good. More of our food makes it out of the crop land, the farm, if you will. But if we are exposed at a high dosage, then that can be very harmful. And they have to break down quickly. If they're not, if they're too persistent, then it's not good for us, and we have to get rid of them. Industrial chemicals, things like building materials, carpets, cleaning fluid, furniture. If you have a really old building, you have to occasionally get it tested for lead-based paint if you're going to do some remodeling. But the unfortunate thing there is often we don't know that they're toxic or bad until they've been in use for a long time. And then again, with that only 10% are tested each year, we've got a long way to catch up. It's often, when people are complaining that we investigate and find out that something's not right. To dispose of our waste properly is going to help us mitigate the pollution. A lot of the pollution in our environment has to do with just being thrown away incorrectly. Water can carry a lot of those toxic substances into our waterways. If we're incinerating waste, then that can emit those toxins into the air. Mining is a problem. So being able to dispose of our waste properly is very crucial in mitigating the exposure. There's also biological hazards. Today we have outbreaks of diseases that previously didn't exist, right? I mean, we're living in that right now, or they're more widespread than they used to be because we are a lot more connected. We are a lot closer, we've altered our environment, and this allows those diseases to spread very quickly. Pathogens are things that carry diseases, whether that's a bacteria, a virus, a fungi, anything like that that can spread a disease is called a pathogen. Some spread through the air, some spread in drinking water, some spread through a secondary host like a mosquito, like malaria. A mosquito bites an infected person and then goes and bites somebody else and spreads that disease from one to the other. So that secondary spreader is called a host. That's the organism in which that pathogen lives for either all or part of its life. So when we're looking at diseases, the study of diseases, you may have heard this word recently, is epidemiology. We're looking at epidemics, how things spread, how diseases spread. So we collect data from healthcare workers, when they saw things, where they saw things, how to find the origin of the disease, and how to prevent it from spreading. So we really study the disease and try to put a cap on there. In 2004, I'm going to try to find better data for you, but in 2004, our worldwide top diseases, number one was respiratory infections. So whooping cough, influenza, diarrheal diseases was number two, dysentery, cholera. Those were from unsafe water. AIDS was three, measles, malaria, tetanus, tuberculosis. Those are all high up there. And those all have to do with the environment. How well it is taken care of or not. So if you look at how things have changed through time, car wrecks, you see right there, injuries has risen. This is 2016, this is 2000. The diseases of lifestyle, like pulmonary disease, heart attack, are really high, while our environmental diseases are going down. So still your cause of death is more likely to be from your lifestyle than the environment around you. Infectious diseases, most are transmitted through water. In poor areas, it may be used for everything, and so it allows those pollutants, those pathogens to grow. A vector is an organism that transmits pathogens from one to another. So you get cholera, dysentery, malaria spread through mosquitoes, dysentery and cholera through human feces. So if you've got areas that are used for everything, then that allows it to spread and grow. So we can alter our environment to make the disease spread better. Antibiotic usage, contaminating soil, mosquitoes, climate change may cause things to spread better. And we end up hopefully avoiding emergent viruses.